Hello and welcome. My name is Inge Patch, and today I want to discuss with you how we can change the world with thinking circular and why mainstream economics is immune about this. So with this video, I want to equip changemakers, social entrepreneurs, and others who are about to change the world with some useful background information on economics, a very brief economic history, and some of the most recent research happening on global scale in regard on how we can actually achieve a better future. So to start off, I want to start with a small story and the idea of the empty world. Imagine that several hundred years ago, maybe even 100 years ago, how many people have been living on this planet? No, we were maybe 1 million people, maybe 50, then later, maybe 100 years ago, approximately reached a billion size. But still, in comparison to the whole environment which was around us, there were many plain fields, and we were in what Herman Daly called the empty world. Nowadays, we're living in the full world. And to give you one example of what the full world means, if you would take all vertebrate animals, so all the humans, so I take all 8 billion humans as we are, and then I take all vertebrate animals, so animals with a vertebra, and I add them here. So all the cows and all the pigs and everything which we humans domesticate and control. And then on the other hand, I take all vertebrate animals which are still in wildlife, so maybe zebras in Africa, etc., etc. And I would put these two on a scale. I would reach a ratio of 97 to 3. So this means that we control, for example, when it comes to when do they get born, when do they die, what do they eat, what happens to their excrements. We control this of 97% of all the vertebrates on this planet. And this is what Herman Daly means with the full world, a world in which the humans are simply having a control, wantingly or not wantingly, knowingly or unknowingly, on a lot of the biological processes happening. And this is where we are now. And we are only in this stage since maybe 30, 40, 50 years. It's not been very long since this ratio became so big. And that's why certain of the theories which have been developed 100 or 200 years ago are simply not valid anymore, because they come from a viewpoint where the world has been very different. And this has led us to, for example, that we nowadays, when we think about all these biological circles, there are certain circles which are way out of track and where we really have reached beyond the zone of uncertainty, where we have very high risk that we change the system, the way our planet basically works, on the long run irreversibly. In particular, when it comes to the genetic diversity, so biodiversity, or to certain biochemical flows such as phosphorus and nitrogen chemical flows, which are related to the way we do agriculture nowadays. The good news is there are also some boundaries in which we are in a safe stage, but there is a separate video on this if you want to deepen that. Anyhow, we have with this tool, the Planetary Boundaries, we have a very nice tool to say, okay, this is the playground with which we should act, and that was the idea behind that research. And this has been, for example, also adopted by the idea of do not economics, saying we should have an economics which is acting within this, and thinking circular helps us in this. Anyhow, what I want to talk more about today is like this can lead us to actually two different worldviews. We can talk about how we humans have been really, really bad, the way we do, the way we deal, how actually we are all a burden for the planet. And I think you all know this joke that the planet would be better off without us. So this is not the interpretation I share. I know that it's a very common interpretation, but I do not really share it. I prefer the interpretation saying there have been structures established in an empty world, which are simply not suitable for the full world. But because there are path dependencies, so a law established 150 years ago isn't easily changed, we simply live several of these structures without that we actually changing them. And now that we become aware that these structures are harmful, we should simply say, okay, let's not dwell upon it, who has been bad, but simply let's change the structures in order for them to fit into a full world, which means for me becoming, among other things, circular in the way we behave. But change is something like, let's say, a habitual thing very often. No? So there are many habits we have, whatever, when we wake up, how we commute to work, what we eat for breakfast, and so on. So these are habits. So, but the good news is habits can be changed. And I want you to do a small exercise right now. Could you just cross your hands in front of your body? And now look down and check which hand has been on top. Okay? So after this has been okay, now loosen your hands again, and now again cross your hands, watch down. Which hand has been on top? Is it the same? Yeah, for me it's always the same. I always have my left hand on top. So that's habit. So now I want you to go and put it the other way around. So if your left hand was on top, close your hands with having your right hand on top, or if it was the other way around. So you will see how this feels a bit odd, no? You have to think about it. But then if you would do this 10 times, this habit would be changed. And this is what keeps us sometimes from changing habits, such as what do we have for breakfast and so on, that we have to think about it. But the good news is when you consciously do it and when you really make it your target, then you are able to do it. And I think that's what we have to do with many things when it comes to the question of economics, how we handle our daily life, how we do business, how an organization should be structured, how products are produced, how products are consumed, and so on. So there are a lot of small habits which we can just change one by one. We don't have to change everything right now, but we change it one by one with a very conscious awareness. And once we have crossed our hands 10 times the other way around, this will become the new way of doing it. So one thing, and I think this has also to do with changing habit, but also a thing with how to view the world, is adjust our perception of economy. And I have done a full series on the blind spots of economy. And I think the main key message I want to leave here is saying economy is not a natural science. Economy is always a social science, and in social science, there is always a hypothesis and there is always an assumption, values which are behind the way we treat it. And everyone who has put up any kind of economical theory is also child of the we all children of the age in which we are born, no? And in the past, all the economic theories, they have had several blind spots. Let's say nature as a blind spot. Barely any economic theory considers nature anyhow. In best case, they consider natural resources, but nature and the natural processes are not part of any economic theory. As funny as it sounds, but also, for example, the monetary system is not part of any economic theory, even though there is a lot of systemic influence the monetary system has on how we handle our economy. Or what about all the feminist work or the care works, say, looking after children and so on? So all these things are not considered, and we have to simply be aware that whichever economic theory we apply and whichever economic theory policies follow, for example, they always will have a blind spot, and that's what we have to acknowledge. So we shouldn't just focus on saying, but that's it, it is a supply and demand, and we have to stick to this, or we need to have economic growth. There is no point in sticking to this. Basically, this is all a theory made up and which can break down as well, and many of these theories have broken down meanwhile. A very interesting book in this regard, which I can recommend, and there is also videos made on this, there is a separate series, is saying what is wrong with neoclassical thinking. And some of the patterns which are really wrong is that there is no market equilibrium. There is a path dependence, so things can be in a locked-in state. There is no free market as we always imagine it in theory. Yeah, women and men are complex beings, so there is not the homo economicus, which is consuming in order to increase his utility or her utility. There is always a social and political environment which influences our economic behavior. Development is just more than growth, and there are limits to growth. So these are like 7 points, for example, which are very common in economic policy and the way we think about running a business and doing an business organization and so on. Which are simply outdated if we look at the latest research from complexity theory. To give you just but one example is the the point of growth and development. No, there is like this permanent stereotype. We need to have economic growth in order for us that we're better off. No, so everyone is promoting economic growth, be it the United Nations, be it politicians on the local level, the newspaper. This is just a very common thing to say. But already Peter Schumpeter knew that that growth and development is not the same thing, because we have here this symbol. This should be a symbol from complexity theory. We say, okay, now we are in a current way how our economy works, yeah, no? How we as a society organize things and so on. And as long as we're in there, there might be growth, quantitative growth inside this, but there could be a systems change. Let's say when you remember feudalist societies 500 years ago, no? They were in a very different system that our capitalist system was, for example. And we don't know what is the next thing. So we would be very naive to believe that the capitalist world order we have now is like the remaining world order for the rest of lifetime, so to say. So there will be new systems, and in new system, very different patterns will be there. There will be new variables, new patterns, and so on. So this is a paradigm shift, so to say, which is happening. And we don't know really, like, if we talk about development as growth, then we're always thinking like if we were the same pattern as we are now, where development for many years was meaning growth. But development can be totally different and cannot be connected to economic growth, for example. So yeah, this would be some things. And when I take this again as an entrepreneur, as a change maker, when I run a social business, for example, like, how can I avoid maybe getting into this growth gap? So what are the ways of financing? What are the ways of running this organization without being stuck in this bigger, better, more? But how can I get out of this? And we will also learn in some other videos about some useful things there. Another very interesting framework in order to understand change, and also there is a video series which describes this more in detail, is a research by the Stockholm Resilience Center, which is called the Smartest Scenario. And they were wondering whether it's possible and under which condition it's possible for us to stay within the planetary boundaries and still reach as many sustainable development goals as possible. And they have made a really complex computer model, which is still, of course, simpler than reality, but which probably has come very close, or has come closer to see, okay, what would happen, and has already figured out, even in the simplified model, if we continue the growth approach, if we continue business as usual, or even if we continue if we would start to say, okay, we do more social efforts, without changing some basic underlying key points, we will fail to actually achieve the sustainable development goals, and we will navigate towards having a lot of the planetary boundaries in the yellow or the red zone, where it becomes really dangerous, where at the moment we only would have 2 there. But they also managed to model a smartest scenario. And in the smartest scenario, we were actually able to score 12 out of 7 sustainability development goals by 2050, and none of the planetary boundaries is in the red zone, and 4 of them would be in a yellow zone, so in a increased risk zone, but still much better than you see, for example, the green line here, which would be the smartest scenario, and all the others, they would have like a tendency even to say, okay, it would get worse then. And some of the key elements which was part of the smartest scenario was a very quick change to renewable energy, was a change in agriculture and food patterns. So more plant-based diets. Doesn't mean that everyone has to become vegetarian or vegan, but that overall plant consumption has to increase, and the distance between consumers and producers of food has to decrease. Just a very strict and consequent limit of the wealth gap which can be there, and a very strong focus on education and health services, particularly for women all over the planet, as this would have tremendous systemic effects and multiplier effects on other areas. So this is a good news, I would say. How is this relevant for social entrepreneurs and change makers? Well, I think it's important that you understand that there are some things you can do on a small level, and that you see, for example, the bigger impact, which, for example, any social business promoting vegetarian food would have. But that then you also understand that in order for really having a better tomorrow, there are some systemic things we have to deal with together, which are like lying on a democratic level, such as a redistribution of wealth, so that it is the interaction between all these activities which can help. So, and keep on being encouraged. Last but not least, I want to introduce a study of Dietz and O'Neill about the steady state economy, which I find also interesting and inspiring for us to understand how we can live in a circularity and would we be as happy as we are here now. So they basically have asked this question. They have had a conceptual framework where they say, okay, we look into circularity from a physical point of view. So they have their biophysical accounts, how much energy and material is going in a circle. And they have looked at the question, are we happy then? And they have tried to find some indicators on happiness, so to say. And then they have mapped this, collected all this data for different countries, have figured out which countries are stable, which countries are under growth, which countries are under degrowth. And they have found out that biophysical stable countries are normally having a higher well-being. So no matter, so the point was, it doesn't need growth to be happy. Growth is not the necessity for being happy or being satisfied with life or having good health or having good working hours or having an equal share between people. So all these indicators, as you can see here, they peak with the S, which means a stable country, so to say. So we know that there is no statistical significant relationship, for example, between the growth and unemployment rate and so on. So we don't need to grow in order to have unemployment. So we can be in a stable country and still everyone would find meaningful activity to do. The bad news is there is a need for circularity, apparently. So it seems that people who live in countries with higher material consumption are normally showing a higher well-being. But again, for me, this is an indicator to say, okay, we should really try to become circular, because then we can have this material consumption if this is still needed for a certain group of people in order to be happy. But when all these materials go in a circle, then it doesn't matter. So we can consume products as long as they are circular and truly circular economy. But there is another video about this. So I hope you have enjoyed this this short introduction or this overview on the current research, which might be relevant for you as a change maker in order to understand global frameworks, scenarios, and where you can place and why it is helpful to be circular. If you like my videos and my work, please visit my website or follow me on the YouTube channel. Thank you.